welcome back to another update on Kwyll. It's been a little while since the last time. Been very busy, both on Kwyll and other things, but there's plenty to show this time. So without further ado, I'll get into some of the new features that I've been working on in combination with the guys on the Discord, who've been helping me push Kwyll in the right direction, making sure that it's developing, or I'm developing features that serve a purpose, that are useful. So I'll go through them in turn. There's quite a few to touch on. It's been a little while, as I say. So firstly, timeline animations. These are not new, obviously. They've been in there for a little while. So I'll link the video where I introduce timeline animations in the description below. But they've changed a little bit. And this was prompted by a request. It was initially prompted by a request to have a node that allows you to start and stop an animation, which I was about to add, but then I remembered the animation system was always designed to be a little more powerful than it was prior to this release. And a couple of changes you can see down here. So you've got the same main timeline view down here, but these buttons up here are new. So it always had behind the scenes, internally in terms of the data structure, the ability to have more than one animation on an object, but I just simplified it from a user interface perspective in the initial release just to have a single animation. So what I've done now is I've expanded it to allow you to create multiple animations. The plus button here will allow you to add more. Before, it would only allow you to add one. You add one and then it would be disabled. And then you can cycle between them, and there'll be a name here I'll show you in a second. And this flag button is for indicating that the animation that you're currently on will start at the start of the game. It doesn't need to be started manually, and only one can have that flag on. So if you set it on one, it'll be disabled on others. But you can have a situation where there is no animation auto starting, so an object won't start any of its animations on initialization, and you have to then manually trigger an animation using the new node, which I'll show you in a moment. So if I load a sample very quickly that demonstrates this. So you've probably seen this one before. It's the path test. So this was the one I used when I was demonstrating the feature the first time round. So if I select the bubble, you can see this shows the new features. So we've got this animation 0 here. There's no way of naming them at the moment. There's animation 0, 1, 2 and so on. And if you hit the button, you can go to the different animations. So when you're in this animation, you go to edit mode and you're adding, modifying keyframes on that animation. And you'll see that this one is marked as the initial one. So if I hit play, you can see that's the standard animation that this test has always had. I've added a new animation, which if we cycle here, just cycle across the bottom of the screen and cycles. So those are the two animations that we've got now. If I turn off play, and as I say, in partnership with this increased functionality for more than one animation, I've added the ability to control the keyframe or timeline animations from logic. So if I can remember where it's on the object, I believe. So down here we've got some keyboard input. Up and down are being checked, as well as fire. And if we follow the flow for up and down, if up is pressed, it'll flow through to this one, which calls the new node, which is a timeline anim node. It's very similar to the sprite anim, which I've renamed now to sprite anim rather than animation, in that you can control it. You can define which animation is going to be playing and which frame. There's no rate control on the timeline animation at the moment, so that's the thing that's missing. I might add that at some point in the future. But you can control which animation and which frame, and the behavior is very similar to the sprite animation. If you set the frame value to -1, it leaves the frame as it is. so it doesn't change the frame. If you add a non-negative value, then it will use that frame number to start, so you can restart the animation, or you can start halfway through, or whatever. And similarly here, you've got the down button. So this one will start animation 0, which is the V, or the V, upside down V, and then the down button will select animation 1, which is the slider across the bottom. And then also I've hot wired up the jump, the fire jump button to set the animation to -1, which will effectively say don't play any animations. And each one of these sets the animation stop frame when you do the switch to 0. So theoretically, if we play this, it starts because that one was flagged to be the auto starting one, and it does all of its usual stuff. If I hit fire at any point, it just stops playing any animations, so it sets the current animation to none. And then if I hit the up key, it restarts that one at the beginning. If I hit the down key, it switches to the other animation and restarts it at the beginning, so you can switch between them, and whichever one you're on pushing the fire will just stop it. So that gives you a lot of control over how you work with timeline animations. So that's the first feature. So going back to the logic where I was shown before, so the next feature is all about the logic editor. One of the things, anyone who's seen me work with this before in any of the videos, or anyone who's used it, will know that if you right click in the area back here in the board, it pops up a pop-up menu with a list of all the different node types that you can create, and you have to find in a nested menu which node you want before you to select it and have it added to the graph. Now, as the logic capabilities are growing and more nodes are available, it was becoming a little bit cumbersome and time consuming to actually navigate through that menu each time to try and find the node that you wanted to add. So I've modified it and added or changed the way that you select a node effectively to be much more in line with both Godot's own shader editor, node-based shader editor, but also things like Blender and other node tools that people might be familiar with. So if you right click in the background now, it pops up this dialog which has a tree view of all of the nodes that you can add, exactly equivalent to the menu that was before. So they're grouped by type, and you select any of these. Each one now has a small description, so you can get an idea of what each one does just from looking at the description here, which is quite handy. And you can use the keyboard to cycle up and down. But the most important thing is this here, which should be always focused when you pop up this menu. And if you start typing in here, it filters the list and selects the first one. So if you type in something that matches multiple, such as set, then you can use the up and down arrows to go through just the ones that are that match your string that you typed. And then at any point, if one is highlighted and you press enter, it adds that node. And if you press escape at any time, it just cancels. I've also added a keyboard shortcut here, so Shift A will pop it up immediately, so you can work entirely within the keyboard without having to click on anything, which is quite nice. And when it pops up, it leaves the previous search string in there, but selects it so you can just start typing straight away to select the new node that you're after. So it's very efficient, very effective for rapid logic work. Quite pleased with that. So that's that one. And then on to the next thing, which is the last, I think it was the last video, the last proper video. I've done a couple of teasers in the meantime, but the last proper video introduced the idea of screens. And if you remember, I added logic into screens, and this was because prior to that, the only place you could put any logic was on objects. And as screens don't necessarily have any objects, because they don't have to be a game screen, they could be a menu screen, it became necessary to overcome that problem and add the ability to run logic graphs on other things than objects, in this case screens. So there was a lot of work to make that possible, but it was always worthwhile because I had always had a plan to put logic on other things, multiple other things, over time anyway. So I've taken this opportunity now to build on that work and add another couple of areas, in fact, where you can add logic. So this tab up here at the top level, amongst all the main editors, has always been there. It's been there for a long time, ever since the first version, I think, but it never did anything. The idea was always to be able to add game level or global logic in this area. So now I've added that, so you can add nodes in here, and anything you add that runs on an initializer or an always, and any variables you have in here are global to the whole game, so they can be accessed from anywhere. The code will run, the flows will run whether you're on a game screen or not, whichever room you happen to be in, whichever objects are running, it doesn't matter. This one will always run every single frame, and you can add variables that are accessible. So there's a new node type, which is, or two new node types, global variable and set global variable. So if I add a global variable in here, then this variable is on the global logic, but it's accessible from anywhere. So I could go to an object, and in here I can get global variable, and it'll list all the global variables, and I can get that value and set it from within here on the object. So it's a good place to be able to store information, variables that you need elsewhere in the game. So there could be things like score, lives, which level you're on, various different things that you might need from various different places that should be global to the game. So a quick example of how this works. This is one of my test files. So in this one I've got a screen with a single instrument called instrument, and if we go to the global logic, all this does is every frame, which probably isn't very efficient, but for now it's the way to do it. It gets the value of this global variable gvar1 and sets the instrument value to that number, which isn't going to be very interesting because it doesn't change. But if we go to the single solitary, if we go to the room, you can see there's a single solitary object in here, which is a bubble, and it has a little bit of logic on it, which is checking the fire button, and if it's pressed, it's incrementing that gvar. So you can see the use of the get and set global variables here. So all that's doing is, there's no variables on this object, but it's setting the variables in the global logic. So theoretically, if I run this now, the object, when I'm in that room, will increment the global variable every time I push, or while I'm pushing the fire button, and the global logic will then read that every frame and put it in the instrument on the screen. So if you play that and push and hold the fire button, you can see the value goes up. So that's global logic. As I say, these will run all the time, no matter where you are in the game. Once the game is loaded into the spectrum and running, this code will always run. So the other area that I've added logic, you may have noticed, is in the room itself. So there's a logic tab in here now as well. Now room logic is specific to a room. It will run only if the screen that you're currently in is a game screen, and if you're in the room that has the logic on. So I'll load up a sample that find it. There you go. That has some logic on here. It's doing very similar thing to what I just did on the global, but in the logic, in the room logic. So this is doing it all in one place. This is just basically, if the fire button is pressed, increment the local variable on the room. This is not a global variable, this is a variable on the room, and set the screen instrument value to that variable every frame. So this will only happen if that room is live. So if we hit play and we go into that room, push fire, and the value increases. And you can see over here we've got some extra information in the debug now. We've got global, which will list any global variables if there were any, and room lists the room variables and their screens as well. So lots more information showing over here that'll help you debug problems with your logic. So I think that's it for that's it for the room logic. Now the other thing I had to add, which incredibly simple from a demonstration purposes, but actually to implement it was quite complex. One of the reasons it took a little while to get this video out is the idea of resetting the game. So this became apparent when I introduced the concept of screens. So I'll load the screens test to show you what I mean. So if we go to the screens, we've got 3 screens here. We've got a menu screen, which is where you come to begin with. It's got the flag to show that it'll be the initial screen, which it's not a game screen, so it's just got some information. In this case, just a welcome message, and then some logic on the screen that will, when fire is pressed, take you to the game screen. The game screen is a game screen. It has the blue game area and some instruments, and it'll play the room, single room, which is just the player, a couple of things to collect, and an enemy that will kill you. And if you hit the enemy, if you collect the things, it'll increment the score and update the instruments as you'd expect. But if you hit the enemy, it'll take you to the game over screen. And then from there, the logic in here allows you to go back to the main menu to restart and try again. Which is fine, except when you come back into the game screen, the player will be where they were before, which is in contact with the enemy. So they'll die immediately. And this was the thing that was happening when someone was working on a game, and I noticed it. Well, I think the tester noticed it on this test as well. That once you die once, you can never get back into the game, because it just, effectively as soon as it goes into the game, you die and go straight to the game over screen. So you're just cycling between menu and game over. So it was apparent that I needed some way of resetting the game so that you could get a chance to play again, which it wasn't doing before. The game was just, it would play and keep playing. So I added a new node which allows you to reset the game. All of the requirements were already in there. The objects, if you open an object in a room, you'll see it has this position. This position is stored internally as the initial position, not the position that it's currently at. And if you look at some logic, excuse me, if I go to some objects and go to a player logic, where I'm reading instance data, you can see the instance data has a start x and a current x, so it's x and y. So these are the values that are set in the rooms editor. So that's where they are there. So I had all the information to be able to put the position of all objects back to where they started. We have the initialize flows on logic, which should run when the game starts. So pulling all those bits together, I've formalized the way that the initialize logic runs now. So when you start a game, or using this new node reset a game, restart, all of the initialized logic on all objects in all rooms will run. All the initialized logic on all room logics will run. All the initialize on screen and the initialize on global logics will all run. And that's the only time they run, when the whole thing starts. So that allows you to reset the game back to a known good state that gets you back to a game start. So if we go to the player logic, no, it's not the player logic, it's I made this mistake before, it's the menu screen logic. When you go from the menu screen to the game screen, when the fire button is pressed, instead of just switching straight to the game screen, it just runs this very simple node. No parameters, no nothing. It's just, as long as it's in the flow, this will reset the game back to its initial state. So now if we preview in here, push fire to go to the game, we can go and collect some goodies and then die, takes you to the game over screen. back to the menu, and then push fire again, and everything has been reset back to start, so you can try again. So that was a bit of work, but absolutely necessary. What I've actually done for anyone using the early access who hasn't already seen it, I've updated the documentation. The link is on the Discord. I'll put it in the description below. It's very work in progress documentation, but one of the things I've added is a chart or a graph that shows the order of execution of the initialize and the always flows, and when things get run, so you can get an idea of what your logic will do and when in this new world. So that's the reset game node. On to the next thing. So this was prompted by some work that a new tester on the Discord was doing. Very bravely decided to try and do a scrolling game, despite the fact that Kwyll does not do scrolling. Certainly not at the moment. It's something that maybe further down the line, version 2 or something, but at the moment it's very much a room-based game creator. So they did some experiments, they did some hacking around, and made some progress quite impressively by using sprites to scroll a landscape. Unfortunately, they did hit the problem that on the Spectrum side there's a limit to the number of sprites you can have, memory use and so on. So it just wasn't going to work, and it was very slow. Although I don't know how much the speed was an issue, but certainly the fact that you couldn't use as many sprites as necessary to get a full screen width scrolling landscape. So I got to thinking about this, and although, as I say, it's certainly not intended that Kwyll can make scrolling games, I thought it was an interesting challenge. So I came up with one possible idea, given that the landscape they were trying to scroll was very simple. It was just a green area down here that had a bit of roughness at the top that scrolled, so that the vehicle could ride on this scrolling landscape. I figured it could be done cheating a little bit using tiles and the modify tile node. So if we go to logic, there's a modify tiles node. If you haven't seen it, there's a whole video where you can actually paint sections of the tile map, whole rectangles with different tiles and collision information and so on. So I figured if you could use that, you could basically paint. So if I paint an equivalent of the floor here that they were working with, but it wasn't bricks, obviously. It was a landscape, noisy landscape. But I figured if you was to duplicate 8 copies of that tile and then shift them 1 pixel, you could, in the modify tiles logic, choose your tile programmatically based on the scroll X position or the scroll offset. So 1 would be, or 0 would be this one, and then 1 might be shifted, everything shifted that way by 1 pixel, left by 1 pixel, and so on. So you can see that if you create 8 pixel copies, you can do left and right scrolling fairly easily, by then painting each time the scroll changes that section of the map, that row. So I tried this just to see if it would work before I suggested it to the guy who was testing this idea, and I did manage to get it working. But the pain was, until now, the only tools you had in the tile editor was paint a pixel and delete a pixel, unlike the sprite editor, which has a bit more capability. So I ended up having to duplicate 8 of these landscape tiles and then manually paint and wipe out pixels to shift it over. It was painful and annoying, but it did the job, and I managed to prove that it would work. But as soon as I'd completed that and proven it, I decided I was going to add the move and flip tools to the tile editor, the same that we have in the sprite editor. So these tools have always been here, or been here for a while. So now you can just switch into move mode, and you can scroll left and right, so you can see there very easily how the scrolling effect would work. So all I had to do was then duplicate a tile, shift it that way, duplicate a tile, shift it that way, which is much easier than doing it all by hand. So now if you cycle through these, you can see you get the scrolling effect. And then I managed to prove that it would work, albeit a little bit slow. So we've now got these tools in here as a consequence of that work. And if I just load up something else, I've got flip as well, and vertical and horizontal flip. So that'll make designing tiles a little bit easier. So that's the changes to the tile editor. We're getting to the end of this. I didn't realise quite how long it was going to be, how much there was to do, but there's two more things, and they're related. So you may have noticed that there's some new tools in the room editor that weren't there before, these four. I'll come to this one in a minute, the last one, but these three are to do with cutting and pasting sections of the tile map. So this is a select mode, which allows you to then select sections of the tile map, and then we've got copy and paste, which are also bound to Control or Command C and V, as you'd expect. So now you can select an area of the map, copy it, and then paste it in another area. It copies all of the information. So if there's colour, it'll copy the colour, collision, and the tile, and you can paste them very quickly. So, and then if we go to select mode again and select another area, let's make it a bit smaller, Command C, and then you can paste. So you can see how this would make designing rooms a little bit more efficient than it was before, having to paint each tile by hand, especially if you've got lots of areas that are similar or duplicated in different places. And once you copy into a single copy buffer, you can change room and paste in another room, so you can copy features from one room to another if you want to do that. So that was a quality of life improvement that allows you to be a little bit more efficient when designing these rooms. But I had an ulterior motive, so that was that feature. That's the entirety of that feature. But I had an ulterior motive when I was implementing this feature. So one of the things I'd noticed is that the export of detailed rooms was quite memory hungry in some cases. So I came up with an idea that I hoped would, or I hope will, alleviate that to some degree, especially when you're using a lot of you have a lot of features in your map that are repeated, like this I've just done here. So by pasting these, there's no efficiency gain here at all. This is just basically as if I painted each one of these tiles by hand and then coloured them by hand and then put in the collision by hand. So the export is exactly the same as if I'd done it by hand. But this other feature, this final feature for this video is designed to make that sort of map where you have repeated elements more efficient at export time. So you'll have noticed over here, prior to this release, this entire bottom 2/3 was tiles, and then underneath that was the objects. So the objects and markers are in their own tab, and then there's this third tab. This is the reason for splitting it up rather than crushing too much into one space. So the idea of a brush is that you can select, if I just undo those pastes, so we start with a cleaner space. So if I select that section now, but instead of copying it and pasting it, if I create a brush, then it stores that brush separately. It stores all the information that's in there. So in this particular case, all that's stored is the collision and the tiles, because there's no colour information. If I turn the collision off, you can see there's no colour information. So now I can select that brush in the brushes list. I can go into brush mode and I can paste them. But the difference to doing it this way and what I had before, which was copy and pasting them, is that, let me just create a new brush there, select that, so I can duplicate the same thing that I did before. 1, 2, 3, 4. So what we're doing here is, when these, you can see, are identified as brushes rather than individual tiles. So they're not stored as part of the tile map. All that's stored is the coordinate, the cell coordinates, the grid coordinates that the tile will be placed at, and the number of the tile to place there. So it's very efficient if you've got lots of repeated features in your level. Instead of exporting all of this as individual tiles, it'll export 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 very simple references to these 2 tiles, and then these 2 tiles are stored elsewhere. So it creates the ability to, or gives you the ability to generate more complex levels more efficiently if your levels or rooms have a lot of repeated features that go over multiple tiles. So I wanted to very quickly show a more real-world example. So one of the developers on the Discord has been working on a game that particularly suits this new feature. In fact, it was one of the games that made me start thinking about how to implement maps more efficiently. So if I turn off collisions on here, you can see there's a lot of repeated tiles on here. Now every one of these is currently painted as a tile. So these are the tile, the 4 tiles that make up each one of those blocks. They're all painted. They're all tiles, and they're all painted in colour, and they've all got the collision. So this uses a lot of space when exporting, resulting in a very large export that's actually currently too big to play on the Spectrum. So I just wanted to quickly go through how you might convert something like this, which has been designed in the old style, to something that is more efficient using brushes. So what you might think to do straight away is just to create a brush for the block, and then just paste the blocks all over the place. But that's probably not the most efficient way of doing it in this particular case, because you're generating a lot of blocks. It will be more efficient than doing it with tiles, but not as efficient as it could be. So I wanted to show a little bit of the strategy that I would employ that might give people some ideas when they're doing this themselves. So what I would do here is, because there's combinations of tiles here in lots of different groupings, I would try to optimize the brushes so that you can use as few brushes on the room as you can get away with, while not generating too many brush definitions. So it's a balancing act. So what I thought was a good thing to do would be actually create a brush for 1, so you've got this single one, but then create one for 2 vertically and 3 vertically, and that's probably a good balance there, and then 2 horizontally and 3 horizontally. So you've got these 5 brushes that you can use to paste over here. So then, to convert this now, I found the best way to do it is actually to go in first of all in tile mode and delete all the tiles. So once this is done, you're left with, on your map, your tile map, just the attribute information and the collision information. So you can see that there's attributes there because the system Kwyll will show you where you've got a tile that has attribute information but no tile, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to see and that is quite a costly export time if you're accidentally exporting attribute information that isn't needed. So I put that in before, but it's actually proving quite useful for this. So now we've got collision information shown and the attribute information shown. So the next thing I did was to actually turn off the collision. We don't need that anymore because it's baked into the brushes. So let's get rid of all of the collisions. So now when once I've done this, when this level gets exported, the tile map information in the exported code will be empty, and for all of this section anyway, and the collision data for all of these tiles will be empty. So that's that. Now I've decided to leave the attributes in there for now because they're really handy to see the original layout of the map. So I can now go back into brush mode. I can choose my 3 high, and I can paste it anywhere there's an obvious place for 3 vertically. I think that's all of those, and then we've got 2 vertically in various places, so let's put those in. And then we've got 3 horizontally in one place, I think, and then 2 horizontally in a few places, and then we just got the single blocks to finish everything off. Now this will have pasted in, as I showed before, all the colour information baked into the block, all the collision information. So if we turn the collisions off, you can see there are collisions there. And now that I've got the map redrawn, I can go into paint mode and delete all of the attribute information because they're baked into the brushes and aren't needed separately. So now when you export, for all of this section within this border here, it will export no tile information, no attribute information, and no, I missed one there, and no collision information. So much more efficient. All it stores is for each brush 3 bytes, literally, X and Y position and which brush. So that's more efficient to begin with. That will create a much more efficient export of this room. But there's more we can do. So you'll see that there's this border here. If I turn on collision, this border has, in fact, if I turn off attributes, I've added attributes and brushes in here, so you can turn off all the brushes very quickly. So if I turn off collision and attributes, so you can see there's attributes around there as well. So there's collision, attributes and tiles all the way around this border. So what I could do there is take it a step further by creating, now what I'm going to do first actually is I'm going to delete the attributes. So if I turn off the collision so we can see the colours, I'm going to delete the attributes, and I'll explain why in a moment. And this is how I did this when I was trying to optimize as a test. So this border is used in all of the game designer's levels. So you can see it's used in all of the other levels. Now, you could use the attributes to give it the colour that you want, or, as I did explain in another video, a more efficient way to do that is in the map, is to set the default paper and ink colour, and then all of these tiles will use the paper and ink colour for that. So if I edit this here, you have a paper and ink colour. All those tiles that don't have their own colour in the room definition will take on the paper and ink colour in the map for that room use. So this allows you to reuse this room and use a different border. But more importantly, even if you're not going to use the room multiple times, it's much more efficient to not export colour information, but just have the room definition define the colour for all tiles that don't have their own colour. So this is an optimization that you should use when designing rooms, is find the map, the area of your map that has the most use of a single color, and then take away or don't apply any attributes to that color, but instead set the color in the room, which is much more efficient. I hope that makes sense. So now that I've done that, I'm going to cut these out as brushes. I'm not going to do it as one big one because it's inefficient. It would store information in all of these. So 4 is much more efficient way of creating these brushes. So we've got this zoom in here. So if we zoom in, we can see we've got this one here. I want one down here too. And we'll create a left and a right one. Now that will have captured the tiles and the collision information, which is still there. So now if I turn off the tiles all around the border, and the collision information, so now effectively when this room is exported, it will export null, empty for the tiles, attributes and collision information. So it's going to be much more efficient. Everything is drawn with brushes, and then we can just paste that brush there, that brush there, the left brush there, and the right brush there. So now this is entirely drawn with brushes. If we turn the brushes off, you see everything just disappears. So that's how I got to an efficient use of that room. And then when you come to these other rooms, you'll notice that they use a different block tiles, so you'd have to create new brushes, a new set of what I'd probably go with another set of 5 brushes for these, and then redo that. But you can reuse the border brushes that we defined before. And again, when it comes to the map, you'll notice that the objects aren't currently drawn in the map. That's a bug that's going to be fixed. But you'll be able to define what border color you want by setting it in here. So that's the most efficient way of doing that particular game, using the new brushes system just as an example of how brushes can work to your benefit to make a more efficient game. Hi, editing Paul here. Just while I was putting this together, I realised I missed an important explanation about the way that brushes and tile maps interact. So you'll have noticed when I was doing this that I now basically replaced everything in this room with brushes. But what's useful to know about the way that the brushes work is they're drawn first onto the screen, or onto the Spectrum screen, and then anything in the tile map is drawn. So it does mean you can use brushes to do large scale changes, but then tweak at the tile level. So for example, I could this is all brushes, and these brushes, if I go to brush mode, you'll see this is a horizontal 2 and a single one there. But I can choose to paint tiles and they paint over the top, and the same with the attributes. So now if you turn the brushes off, you've just got that, but they're drawn over the top. So you can actually draw with brushes for large scale efficient use, but then tweak little things with individual tiles. So the only thing that would actually get exported in the tile map here is just those 4 little bits there. So it's still very efficient, but it does give you the ability to make changes to brushes at a single cell level, and tweak individual uses of the brush depending on what you need in your level. So I think that's all for this update. There's a lot there to chew on. So as always, if you like what you're seeing, do pop a like and possibly subscribe if you're interested in getting updates when I release new videos. But perhaps more importantly, pop over to the Discord and engage with us over there. There's a lot of people over there now, all giving some good ideas and asking good questions and moving the development of Kwyll forward. at a pace. So pop over and say hi. I'll see you next time. Thank you, everyone.